You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Happy Friday evening, folks. This is Scotty Roberts. Welcome to my show at the end of your busy week. This is the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. That pregnant pause was more for the video. So those of you just listening, you didn't get to see the facial expression. It's the end of the week. Welcome to it. It's been a long week. There's more long weeks to come. Winter is starting up here in the Great White North. Too early, might I add. I remember years past, probably the worst one we had was 1991, the Great Halloween Blizzard that happened Halloween. And we got like 21 inches of snow, something like that, which was ridiculous. I grew up here in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, and as a kid, I don't remember it ever snowing on Halloween. I rarely remember a Halloween where we had to bundle up with coats and jackets. You might wear a sweater or a sweatshirt underneath your costume, but that was about it. Now, so we're getting a lot colder these days. We're going through a cycle. Maybe we're entering a new ice age. But right now, it is what, the 23rd? What is it? Yeah, it's the 23rd of October. Has been all day. And it's cold here. I was supposed to go do some ghost hunting tonight at the Renaissance Festival. And ghost hunting, I use that term. It's probably a bad way to describe what we do. Not just ghost hunting. We're out looking for things, yes, but we want to understand things. We research. But at the festival tonight, we were supposed to do a little research, take people around to the different stages. If you've seen some of my posts on my Facebook page, you'll know what those were. Oh, and by the way, if I didn't say so, if you're listening audibly on Odyssey, ODYSY1.com, you can also come over to my YouTube channel and watch the video simulcast. That's at youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. And you can join the other people that are chatting up a storm right now in the chat room, the other Intrepids. But the festival, I canceled out of that tonight, and so did Rocky, who most of you know, and so did Sarah Soderlund, our shield maiden. She has to drive a lot further than we are. She's up in northern Minnesota, and she had about a 3-hour drive to come down here, and we have about an hour and a half coming from a different direction than Sarah, and to get out to the festival grounds, and that's each way. And you know what? It just wasn't worth it tonight. It's too cold, it's too snowy, it's too icy. And it's not that I haven't lived in this for 60 years and know how to drive in it and understand the weather, know how to dress for it and all that. I'm used to it. We've done this every year. Except it's too early this year. So it was just 85 degrees last week. So you know what? This 30 degrees for a high temperature, and we're talking Fahrenheit, folks, it's ridiculous. If it was 30 degrees Celsius, it'd be a different story. So tonight, not going out there. Going to be here instead, doing the show instead. Otherwise, we'd have postponed this show and played a replay. So I want to thank you for being here and for listening to the things I have to say. And, you know, I have been in recent days, and I'm not, by recent days could be anywhere from, you know, yesterday to 3 years ago. Recent days and recent times. But recently, in just this last week, I've been told by a few people how cocky I am, how haughty I am, how holier than thou I am. Here, there's my holier than thou eye, staring at you. I'm holier than thou. I think I'm better than everybody else. All of these things have been told me, and some by certain people within the fields and the communities where I've spent a lot of time. And I'm going to tell you something. Confidence, being able to talk about the things that you know, being able to express your convictions about something, why do some people want to consider that cockiness, or consider that holier than thou, or consider that arrogance or narcissistic? You know, all a bunch of ridiculousness as far as I'm concerned. Maybe that's part of it right there. That's a ridiculous take on somebody who knows what they're talking about, or at least has worked very hard to know what they're talking about. Now, even if I'm wrong on some things, I express my opinion. and I'll give you my opinion. I'll share my opinion with you. I'll tell you in a polite way why I think your opinion might not be so right. And just because that's the way I see things. I responded to somebody who said, well, yeah, somebody told me I have blinders on. And I said, well, blinders, there you go. I said, that's characterizes my life, doesn't it? Just the guy who wears blinders. I said, I rather prefer to think of it as the guy that incorporates common sense, looks at things, sorts things out, and expresses to you what he believes. That's all I'm doing. So if you listen to my shows and you think I'm a cocky bastard, if you think I'm arrogant or narcissistic or think I know it all or am holier than thou, I don't think you're listening very well. And maybe that's what some people also call my being holier than thou. You got to listen a little better. You got to listen with better ears. If you think that is my take, that is my approach, and that's my nature, because I don't think they are. But knowing what you believe, even when you don't know everything you believe, I've said how many hundreds of times on this show, I don't know what I believe anymore about certain things. I'm an agnostic. Why do I call myself an agnostic? Gnosis, knowledge. I don't have knowledge of things. And I preach a very dogmatic Gnosticism, don't I? And I will tell you this as well. In talking about religion, in talking about spirituality, in talking about Jesus, in talking about God, in talking about the Bible and church, these are all things I enjoy talking about because I've talked about them my whole life. I've studied them, I've researched them, I've mulled over them. I've walked away from them. I've reconciled certain elements of my life with them. And there are times where I can come out with a pretty hard line about Jesus, about God, and say, look, I don't think that he was what we think he was on the basis of what we were taught in church. There's more to him or maybe less to him. Yet there are times when I talk about these things where I'll admittedly that it can draw me right back into it. And I don't mean in a negative, brainwashed, weird kind of way. I mean there is a heart-level thing that draws me back into talk of Jesus, talk of God, talk of... I don't know exactly what I believe anymore, but I find that I am, to use an old phrase, pricked in my heart about certain things. And I don't see God the way I used to, but I also have a problem writing him off. There is a song that I heard this morning, and only because while I was reading through this stuff, the song hit my mind. It hit my mind during last night's show, actually, and I couldn't look it up. There's a song called Creator. It's either The Creator or The Creator's Song by an old group out of the 1980s. Christian contemporary music group, Harvest. And that song, the Creator's Song, in there it says, "Worthy art thou, O Lord, our God." Excuse me, I swallowed wrong. To receive glory, honor, to receive glory, honor, and power. Something like that. Excuse me. And the harmonies were beautiful that they wrote for these songs. And it was contemporary music. In some of the very conservative fundamentalist Baptist churches I was in at the time, you couldn't play that music. You couldn't sing that music because it was too contemporary. And so they had beautiful harmonies and beautiful lyrics and so on. One of the songs that I saw, and I grabbed the lyrics, it says, it starts off by saying, "In days gone by, you felt so sure. Now your dreams of joy and peace are faded memories. Once you hungered for his word, he seemed so near. Now the distance seems to grow with every heartbeat. Somehow you feel you've gone too far. No reason to try. But he's there with you where you are. Open your eyes." And then the chorus of the song, and this is a song I used to sing with the youth group when I was a youth pastor back in the early 1980s. And it says, "You'll see a man acquainted with your sorrows. You'll see his eyes sharing in your tears. You'll see his arms never lost their hold on you. So lift your eyes, you'll see the Lord. It says, his grace is yours, his mercy flows. The river of his love is never ending. Jesus knows you by your name. He holds your heart. You'll never leave his sight. Open up your eyes. And then it does the chorus again. You'll see a man acquainted with your sorrows. You'll see his eyes sharing in your tears. You'll see his arms never lost their hold on you. So lift your eyes. You'll see the Lord. And now I look at those songs. Those are old songs that used to just grip my heart. And it gripped the theme, the passion of the ministering that I was doing to youth and to other people. That's what it was all about, and that's what it meant for me. And what drove me away from that practice and that belief system was all the other stuff around it, all the politics, the church polity, the studying history, finding out there's more to this and that or less to that than I thought. And so it drew me away from that. So the grief and the loss, when you step away from something that you've held to dogmatically and something that you've believed with all your heart, when you step away from those things, it isn't always a clean cut like, hey, I just finally decided that Jesus isn't the Son of God. I've just decided that God doesn't exist the way I thought he does, and I'm uncomfortable walking over there and doing something else now. That isn't always the case, because the grip is sometimes very emotional. And that emotional bonding, if you will, bondage to something, isn't all that bad, but it exists. And that makes it even tougher when you have felt it on a different level. We always say, I look at politics and you say, do you believe something or do you adhere to something in your heart? Is it politics? Is it this is the difference I see. This is my personal opinion, so warning, personal opinion about politics. I look at that and I see Joe Biden as somebody who will say what he needs to say to be where he wants to be politically. And I don't think he's all there anymore. I think he's declining anyway. But this is the way he was throughout his career. I see Trump as somebody who has lived a life that a lot of people don't like, and maybe was the kind of person that people didn't like, who in his old age now has come to learn that there are things about his country he loves that he's maintained his whole life, and he needs to do something about it. So there is, I see, on one hand, you can agree with me or disagree with me. I don't really give a rat's ass what you think about it. I see one candidate who will do and say whatever he does. It's political. It's expedient. It's to get to the office. The other one I see as somebody who expresses what he believes. Whether you think he has a core in his body that believes that way or not, doesn't matter. You and I are not the judge of those people's hearts. We're the judge of their actions. We can see their actions and gauge it by that. This is the same way I see faith and religion and spirituality. There are those that believe it because they were raised in it, those who believe it because this is what they're told they must do, this is the fear factor that's involved in it. You will die a death and you will go to an eternal death in the lake of fire and screaming and hell, fire and brimstone, created for the devil and his angels, according to the Bible, but which we will go to, according to some. Then you have the others that say, that's not what draws me to faith in God. My faith in God is based on what I understand about God and what I see about him. Is it based on history? Sometimes history draws me away from God. Because history is like the facts that are amoral, meaning there is no morality tale to fact, to history. History is because history is. This is just what happened. This is the way things were. Same with archaeology. Now, we can put our own little mind twists and mind games and things onto all of that to create our religions or our spiritualities or our belief systems or the way we want to control other people. But that does not dictate where my heart is on it. All right. You kind of get where I'm coming at on this. And this is why I do a series like this. And this is why a series like this can poke at the heart, at the emotions. It can be the grieving heart for the things that I once believed that I don't believe anymore. It can be the grieving heart for the loss of the things that I've had to throw out with the rest. It would be like, take maybe this is a weird example. It just pops into my mind. So think of it this way. In a divorce, husband and wife separate. There might even be bitterness there. But what about all the relationships around it? What if you were good friends with a brother or a sister-in-law? What if that family was tight with you? What if those parents-in-law were tight to you? So now the person being divorced or getting divorced or in that situation, the loss is greater than a spouse. The loss is a lot of things. It's a lot of people. You'll find your friends around you start taking sides. I'd meet you for lunch, but, your spouse is a friend of mine, and I don't think we should do that anymore. And, blah, 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 stuff like that. We've all seen it happen. If you haven't experienced it, you may have seen it. I've experienced those things. And so, and then you throw kids into the mix, the loss, the separation is more than just, I don't want to be with this partner anymore. And there's a reason, or that partner doesn't want me anymore. The wake is huge. It's like watching a little duck out on a lake, and he's swimming along in a line, and you see this huge, not tall, not massive, not lapping waves, but this huge line of a wake behind him. That's the way this is. That's the way it is when you part ways with a faith system or something that you believed. It's like, I don't believe this is this way anymore on a religious level, but you know what? There's a whole lot more than just encapsulating that in one little thing. I'll just walk away from my faith. There's a lot of other things all around it that spiral in on you at the core. So that's kind of the way I see all of this stuff. And I wanted to pick up where we left off last night, where I was talking about, remember how I left off talking about the hermeneutics of suspicion that's applied to virtually everything in the New Testament when it comes to the study of the historical Jesus? The canonical Gospels, that's the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, which appear in most New Testaments. One is led to think are the least likely source of knowledge about Jesus. And if they're to be used, they have to be purified of later accretions and edits and distortions that are brought forth from a faith perspective. That whole battle between Gnostic mysticism and literal orthodoxy in the first 200 years of Christianity. They have to be read in light of apocryphal writings or some earlier source excavated from within them or some social scientific model. And that indeed the only sources that can't be referred to are the other writings of the New Testament. Paul's letters, we totally push them out. Now we all know, and I know, that Paul was of a certain mindset. Paul, I believe, hijacked Christianity, but he taught something that was real at the same time. He wasn't out there going, I'm going to fabricate a lie now to draw you away from God. No, he had a mindset that he adhered to. He had a theological base that he believed. And some of the things he says, while we might not want to accept him as an apostle, he's not wrong about everything he says. He gave some good teachings. So what's going on here? Why shouldn't the earliest narrative sources and even the earlier testimony of Paul receive credit as historical evidence for Jesus? And the reasons are more ideological than historiographical. Historiographical. There you go. Not historical, historiographical. One is committed to a conflict model of earliest Christianity that goes back to the Tübingen school, the mid-19th century. But it was given powerful new life over 30 years, 40, 50 years ago under the influences of Walter Bauer, who was one of the, he is Orthodoxy and Heresy in earliest Christianity. That's a book where this is talked about. And this model's elevated the legitimate perception of a diverse early Christianity into the dogma that it was disparate movement of deeply opposed forces. This is a truth. It wasn't this glorious, wonderful religion from the onset. There were all kinds of diverse opposed forces in the creation of Christianity as we know it today. In recent scholarship, it seems as though none of these diverse Christian movements knew anything about any of the others. So Burton Mack, who wrote The Lost Gospel, can posit the 40-year development of a Q community in Galilee, completely untainted by any influence from either the Jerusalem church or the Pauline churches. Pardon the sound of my dog. It's very quiet here, and I left my studio door open because nobody's here right now. And now my dog makes her presence known. Sorry about that. So we'll just live with that, okay? Whatever kind of noise the dog wants to make. So now all of this flies in the face of the evidence of both Acts and Paul's letters, which, while candid about the tensions in the early movement, nevertheless show a remarkable level of communication and cooperation between the leaders, including Paul. To avoid this problem, the current model has to throw out most of the book of Acts and expurgate much of Paul, but with the controls provided by these ignored sources. Reconstructions quickly, as in the case of Mack, fly off into fantasy. So Paul in particular has to be excluded from this recent Jesus research for another reason. In contrast to the Protestant theology that for years dominated biblical scholarship, in which Paul was the good guy who championed the principle of righteousness by faith, various liberation ideologies now dominate the research. And in these, Paul appears as the first and greatest enemy, in contrast to the itinerant cynic peasant of Jesus, imagined by John Dominic Crossan, who was another one of these writers of the historical Jesus. Paul is the urban householder, in contrast to the woman-defined Jesus and the wisdom-driven Jesus movements, imagined by Elizabeth Schleicher Florenza. Paul is the proto-patriarch, in contrast to the gay magician, Jesus imagined by Morton Smith. Paul is the hateful homophobe. And so, in other words, to have an ideologically correct Jesus, we must exclude the complexity of an ideologically deviant Paul. But this, I scarcely need to point out, is not critical history. It's the uncritical canonization of an ideological assumption. Got that? It is the uncritical canonization of an ideological assumption. And that's where we got to leave off for this first segment, folks. You sit tight. We'll be right back. We're going to pick up with this in the second half. Stay tuned.
Are you looking for a really awesome and amazing graphic designer? How about an illustrator or a photographer? This is Rainey Roberts, and I wanted to tell you how you can get my designer, illustrator husband, Scotty Roberts, to work for you on your project. Do you have an awesome self-published book but no cover, or even worse, a cover that really sucks? Do you need a kick-ass logo for your company or some f***ing awesome graphic designs for your ads or website? Then get in touch with my husband for the best f***ing awesome kick-ass design and illustration. He knows his stuff, and he's been at this for more years than I've been alive. Go to ScottAllenRoberts.com. That's Scott with 2 T's, ALANROBERTS.com to take a look at his online portfolio of work, or call 651-468-8115. Now go out and kick some ass with some kick-ass graphic design.
Hire my dad so he can take me to Disneyland.
All right, gang, welcome back from that break. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. Come on over, see all the goodness that's Odyssey Radio. At the same time, come on over and check out my YouTube channel for the video simulcast of this show going on right now with the live chat room right now. You can join in the conversation. You can either watch what people are talking about along with the video of this show, or you can throw in your 2 cents worth. We'd love to meet you. So come on over and meet the Intrepid family over at youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Now, we're talking about the historical Jesus. We're on our second day of this. And we're talking about these tendencies, these, what's really going on with breaking down how the historical Jesus is being dissected. There's popular publications claim to represent serious scholarship, but serious scholarship can only rightly object to being tarred by the brush of self-promotion, meretriciousness, sloppiness, cynicism. All of these things build up the historical quest for Jesus. Cynicism being one of them. Perhaps, here, if I can state cynicism in a different way, it would be like saying, we all grew up Catholic, but we're really tired of the Catholic Church. So there must be a different way to define what this is all about. Cynicism in the sense that I don't know if I buy all that anymore, so I think I'm going to find a different way to define Jesus. Oh, well, maybe he just didn't exist. Or let's bring in all these other things. Now, there is efficacy to exploring the historicity of Jesus. One thing an exploration of history and anthropology and archaeology can do for you is give you an idea of who somebody was in history, what the times were like around him. It's never going to tell you if Jesus is the human manifestation of the actual Son of God. You're not going to learn that through history or anthropology. And so that's where the questions come. It's like I said yesterday. Just because history cannot define for us a resurrection, a bodily resurrection of Jesus, doesn't mean it wasn't real and it didn't happen. It just means we can't prove it with history and we can't prove it with archaeology. So we've looked at this whole thing of what these of Paul and his involvement in the story. Why can't we use Paul's writings? Why can't we use the other Gospels to sustain the case? And it's because it's the uncritical canonization of an ideological assumption, is how we ended. We're making an ideological assumption about something that it is so, and therefore we have canonized it because of that. But a second tendency is found. That was the first. The second one is found not only in all these Jesus books that are written, but in New Testament scholarship as a whole. And it's once these relatively stable controls have been excluded, an amazing confidence concerning the way pieces can be arranged happens. The new questers claim to be able to determine by means of various criteria whether sayings attributed to Jesus are authentic or not. They also claim the ability not only to detect with an extant, unified literary compositions of a variety of earlier sources, but also to discern the minutest detail of various levels of redaction within such sources. Next, they assume that behind every composition is a community, and that no one can move from the literary configuration of a text to the historical, social, and ideological configuration of a specific community. Has to be a community behind it. So armed with these assumptions, these ideological assumptions, the Jesus Seminar movement, which was big a few decades ago, can assert with unjustified confidence that Jesus could not have spoken certain parables or have made certain declarations. But for a long time, on the basis of just circular and subjective criteria such as that, determinations have also been made concerning which letters were really from Paul, or which undesirable parts of his letters must also have been interpolations. So in a similar fashion, the Jesus researchers can now trumpet the isolation of the so-called, and I believe non-existent, Q gospel, the material shared by Matthew and Luke but not found in Mark. So as a discrete written source that can be subdivided into levels of redaction. But so have scholars for decades. They've diced up the Pauline letters. Excuse me. Take a sip of my coffee. 2 Corinthians and Philippians are diced up into these separate sources to be shuffled into different stages. Burton Mack can use the levels of redaction in Q to describe the history of a punitive Jesus community in Galilee. Why not? The dissected pieces of Philippians, the book of Philippians, the epistle to the Philippians in the New Testament, were used by Willie Markson to reconstruct the history of conflict in Philippi. And that was, you'll find Willie Markston's Introduction to the New Testament that he published in 1968. And similarly, the severed sources of 2 Corinthians, another epistle of Paul's, have been used to trace the history of Paul's relations with that church in Corinth. And the various stages of redaction in the Johannite corpus have been used to discourse confidently on the history of the Johannine community. And you can find out more about this stuff, by the way, so we don't spend a whole show talking about what that is. The community of the beloved disciple, the Johannine, the John the beloved disciple. And so the Jonian, the Johannine, that's by Raymond E. Brown. So you can look into that. And so when we talk about the Johannite community, the Johannine community, this was the community of those that were the followers of John, the beloved disciple of Jesus. So the new questers follow in this well-trodden path. None of this, however, is real history, but rather an elaborate paper chase around and through history. It's the result of an obsessive need to do history with sources inadequate to supply what's sought from them. You get that? They're trying to build a history out of something using sources that are inadequate to give us the history that they're looking for. It leads to a distortion of historical method, a chimerical historical reconstruction, and the destruction of the only genuine witnesses for the earliest Christianity we have, the discrete literary compositions of the New Testament. Those are legitimate historical sources for what early Christianity looked like. So the final of these three tendencies that we started yesterday, we picked up today, final tendency of the recent Jesus research, especially visible in Borg's writings and Crossan's writings. And by the way, you don't have to be overtly familiar with these authors. These are just some of the guys that have whose texts have stood out in the last few decades about the historical Jesus research, is the embrace of the so-called social scientific models. So to paint his portrait of Jesus, Marcus Borg appeals to the sociological type of the charismatic chassid, which Guy Vermes posited on the basis of the Honi of the Circle Maker, the Canina Bendosa from rabbinic literature, all of that stuff. That's what he builds on. Borg, Jesus the Jew in 1973. It was cited by A.N. Wilson and John Spong as a decisive influence. John Meyer demonstrates just how little evidence there is on which to base such a type. And so this is what I'm referring to. So John Dominic Crowson, who also wrote extensively about the historical Jesus, on the other hand, appeals to the category of the peasant. This becomes formulaic in Crowson's Who Killed Jesus? And having tossed out the narrative controls found only in the Gospels and the writings of Paul, models like these are obviously needed. No matter how many pieces of the Jesus tradition are determined to be authentic, they cannot by themselves ever yield a profile of the actual historical Jesus. No pile of pieces can ever reach meaning, for meaning can only come from pattern. It's like the old... I opened up my book on the Nephilim with this. Hold on. This is just sitting right here on my bookshelf over here. A copy of this. I opened up the book with, in chapter 1, by this quote of Poincare. Hold on. I'm just thumbing over to it. He says, "Science is built up of facts as a house is built of stones. But an accumulation of facts is no more a science than a heap of stones is a house." That's what I'm referring to here, is that this whole thing of having this pile of pieces about the historical Jesus can never really reach meaning, for meaning can only come from pattern. And so the same a house you can have a pile of stones, but a pile of stones isn't a house. Although you can build a house out of that pile of stones. So the same tendency we've observed in this Jesus research has also become prevalent in the study of earliest Christianity, where again there's too few pieces even to make a decent pattern, especially only after the narrative framework is available, that of Acts, the book of Acts. It's thrown out as tenditious. And so to meet this void, some sort of scientific model or an anthropological or sociological model has been invoked to provide a pattern into which the pieces can be fitted. The need to do history demands that the pieces fit into some universally intelligible law of conflict or development. And the result is that the unique is collapsed into the universal. The particular disappears into the general. And nothing new and surprising is encountered, only an instance of universal law. And so in the case of Jesus, the tendency allows this most distinctive and individual of humans only the range of possibilities available to a sociological abstraction. Jesus has to think like a peasant, speak like a peasant, do what a peasant would do. Forget messianic consciousness or a sense of unique sonship. He can't even be literate. He shouldn't be able to read. And so the employment of such models enables the pieces to be put into a new combination. In place of the pattern provided by Paul and the Gospels, it's a more historical pattern? Only if one thinks that brandy-imbibing, cigar-smoking British imperialist adequately captures the significance of Winston Churchill. So you have all these social things that necessarily doesn't describe who the person is at their core. So something other than disinterested historical research motivates these recent Jesus books that explore who the historical Jesus might have been. Present in all of them is this clear reformist goal. They're trying to reform the way we view Jesus, based on the conviction that traditional Christian belief is a distortion of the real Jesus. Already with Paul, they hold the Jesus movement was corrupted into the Christian religion. For Crossan and Mack, the distortion of Jesus' goals precedes the creed and is found in the narrative form of the canonical Gospels themselves. These scholars want a new understanding of Jesus and Christian origins to have an impact on the cultural phenomenon called Christianity by removing what Mack referred to as the privilege of the Christian myth. And you can find all about that in The Myth of Innocence by Mack. And so this implicit and sometimes explicit theological agenda operates on two assumptions that have been around since the birth of the historical critical method. And the first is that the historical knowledge is normative for faith. In other words, if historical research comes up with a different Jesus, then Christianity will have to change its ways. And you can find an example of that by Crossan in his Historical Jesus. And also Jesus, a Revolutionary Biography, and his book, Who Killed Jesus? You can find this put forward. The second is the assumption that a religion's origins define its religious essence. So that the first understanding of Jesus was better than any development of that understanding. But these are not properly historical observations. They are rather ideological commitments. Get the difference? That the assumption that a religion's origins define its essence, so that the first understanding of Jesus was better than any development of that understanding, are not properly historical observations. They are ideological commitments. They're things you've decided to believe about that person, that thing, that event, and you've committed to those ideologies, and that builds the essence of your faith. So the production of such poor historiography and of such confused theology in the same package suggests that all of these authors, like so many others in the Biblical Guild, are caught within some deep and unresolved conflicts concerning the proper or legitimate functions of critical biblical scholarship, concerning the usefulness of an overarching historical model as the dominant paradigm for biblical studies. You can look at Crisis in Biblical Scholarship, which agrees with many of the positions of John Levinson, and so on and so forth. The Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, the Historical Criticism by Westminster. So that's Johnson's Crisis in Biblical Scholarship. Now, I don't know if we're all writing those down, but I think it's good to know some of the source points on these. After all, how much history can we really do with these ancient fragments? In their hands, what is called history is really a camouflaged form of cultural critique of contemporary religious observation. So the frenzied dismantling of the narratives of the New Testament, the scavenging of unusable pieces or usable pieces from the wreckage, the pasting of such pieces into a new pattern derived from anthropology or some other social science, this effort increasingly appears to be an attempt to avoid or replace the unmistakable image of Jesus in the pages of the New Testament. The writings of Paul and 1 Peter and Hebrews, these New Testament books, and the canonical Gospels converge in presenting an image of Jesus that is instantly graspable and has been unfailingly grasped by those whose lives have been transformed in its pattern. And so this image, constructed by the narratives of the New Testament, including the narrative fragments of non-gospel compositions, and found only in these compositions as such, not in their pieces, is emphatically not the developed dogmatic Christ of church doctrine. That's the doctrine of true God and true man. Nor is the historical Jesus reconstructed from bits and pieces, true cynic and true peasant. It is rather the etching of a certain human character, a model of the disposition of the human's freedom in obedience to God and in service to others, an identity so distinctive that is readily grasped even in literary mimesis, like that of Dostoevsky's Prince Myshkin in The Idiot, or Melville's Billy Budd. So, if critics within Christianity, or critics of Christianity, would openly challenge that image, not on the basis of historicity, but on the basis of its religious or moral coherence and adequacy, something far more critical and interesting would be done with the New Testament than we find in the tired, rationalist reductions and reconstructions that try to make history do criticism's work. Is that a head full for you? Because it is for me, just talking about it again. And so when we see all these, and I do it myself, I reconstruct Christianity on the basis of what I learn historically. Now I look, as you know, we did that series a while back, almost a year ago, on Gnostic mysticism versus Orthodox literalism, which is what became the Roman Catholic Church. That's who won that battle. But does that reconstruct the entirety of who Jesus was or is? Are we still left with asking, well, okay, I hear you on all that stuff, but did Jesus ever really exist? How can you question it? There's too much information about the man to say that he did not exist. He wasn't a pure fabrication in history. All of these men did not write their books and their gospels to promote a false person, an invisible, false, fictional character. The man existed. It's understanding who he was and how he was and what he was. Can the study of history and archaeology, sociology, anthropology, tell us whether or not Jesus was the Son of God? Can it tell us that God exists? No, it can't. None of those things can prove that. Those are the things we have to decide to accept by faith alone. You look at like one of the most dramatic stories in the New Testament. I'm segueing into this because I think this is important to discuss. We were going to talk about, a few days ago, I was going to get into Satan and who he was in the Bible. Satan, the devil, Lucifer, and so on. But there's a dramatic story about Jesus in the New Testament, and that's the confrontation between Jesus and the devil, known as the temptation or the testing of Jesus. And immediately following Jesus' baptism by John, it says the devil leads Jesus from the Jordan River into the wilderness. Well, I thought Jesus had just decided to go. He's going to go fasting. There, for 40 days and 40 nights, Jesus prays and fasts. And finally, when Jesus is absolutely starving, the devil challenges him to a series of tests. He's exhausted. He's starving. And in the passage, it says, if you're the Son of God, the devil demands in the Gospel of Matthew, command these stones to become loaves of bread and eat them. Jesus refuses to do this. The devil then leads Jesus to Jerusalem and directs him to throw himself from the temple, the highest pinnacle of the temple wall, to see whether God will save him before he bashes his brains out on the rocks below. But Jesus declines to test God that way. Finally, the devil brings Jesus up to a high mountain, promises him that if he worships Satan, the deceiver, he will gain dominion over all the world, everything your eye sees. And steadfast, Jesus spurns the devil's enticements, crying out, "Get thee behind me, Satan!" Or as the t-shirt I have says, "Not today, Satan!" So, the scenario is so divorced from reality that it's easy to entertain doubts about its literal truth. Is there a Satan? Did Satan appear to Jesus? Did Jesus, as some people ask, did he exist? What is it about this story? It makes a highly dramatic tale, but is that all there is? Did anything really happen here? And some scholars would say, no, nothing happened. But there is an historical substratum to the testing of Jesus. And each test, I'm going to argue, represents a real struggle that Jesus faced in his lifetime. Now, maybe this is taking the anthropological and the sociological and mixing it with the historical and coming up with what I called the ideological assumption that comes out of this. But let's look at this for a minute. The earliest Christians understood Jesus to be human in the same sense that they were. And they recognized that as a man, Jesus faced very human trials. The attractions of wealth and power and how he steeled himself against the natural instinct for self-preservation. And as we'll see, is this all a human side of Jesus that lies behind the extraordinary tale of his testing? Is this a story that is manufactured to create out of this itinerant rabbi a much bigger story? So to reach this historical dimension of Jesus' 3 tests, we have to begin by looking carefully at the texts themselves. We have to consider how the authors worked with earlier sources, deftly quoting Hebrew scripture. And we have to determine what these quotations would have meant in Jesus' time when they were written, and how and why they were applied to him. So the testing is reported very briefly by Mark, who says, "And immediately the Spirit," not Satan, "drives Jesus out into the wilderness. And he was in the wilderness 40 days being tested by Satan. And he was with the wild beast, and the angels ministered to him." Now we can read the whole account of what the 3 questions, the 3 things that Satan presented him with. Is that what he did for 40 days? Those 3 things you can read in 5 minutes? So if he was out there being tested by Satan, what went on during that whole time? Was it aesthetic visions? Was it God-driven, Spirit-driven things? We don't know. We only know of a few minutes of what happened. And so the Gospels of Matthew and Luke provide much more elaborate accounts, satisfying the reader's curiosity by giving explicit details of each test, as quoted in the sidebar, almost of the passages. And the testing is not recounted in the Gospel of John, who leaves it out completely. And although Matthew and Luke include much of the same information, even a superficial reading reveals differences, the most significant being in the order of the 2nd and 3rd tests. And Matthew and Luke agree that the first test takes place in the wilderness, but in Matthew the 2nd test occurs at the temple in Jerusalem, and the 3rd on a mountaintop, whereas in Luke the 2nd is on the mountaintop and the 3rd in Jerusalem. Does that matter? Scholars generally agree that Matthew's ordering is the more original of all the evangelists. Luke exhibits the greatest interest in Jerusalem. He was the historian, the doctor, the physician of the lot. And his gospel is centered on the journey to Jerusalem. And in Luke's 2nd work, the Acts of the Apostles, the mission of the church radiates out from Jerusalem. So it would be entirely in keeping for Luke to modify the order of the tests so that the climax is set in Jerusalem. Is this then a true accounting of what happened? Because in so doing, Luke disrupts the careful design of the passage in Matthew, which exhibits a degree of literacy and literary sophistication that's unique in the New Testament. So, as we look closely at Matthew's text, we begin to detect a number of patterns that tend to confirm that this Gospel's version of the testing story was composed much earlier than Luke's. And on the simplest level, the 3 tests in Matthew take place at progressively higher altitudes. For the first test, Jesus is led up from the Jordan River into the desert. Then he rises to the crest on which Jerusalem, the site of the 2nd test, is built, the temple. Finally, the story concludes on a very high mountain. And so we can start to see the construct of something that becomes an assumed or presumed ideology built off of this. We're going to hit more of this on Monday when we're back. We're going to finish up this little tale of the temptation of Jesus. But right now, we're out of time. So you have a good night. We will see you on Sunday morning, 9 a.m. Central, 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Western or Pacific, right here for It's Sunday. All of you have a good night and a great weekend.